Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. My name is Nicole Alifanti, and I'm one of the co-founders and the president of CURE, the Coalition for Understanding Racism Through Education. I welcome you here today for our final event of Five Towns, One Book. We work with Rochelle, Harrison, Rye, Larchmont, and Croton this year on these events. And the book that we centered these events around is Radical Vision by Soyica Colbert, and it is a biography of Lorraine Hansberry. Miss Hansberry has opened up many doors for us. There have been so many themes and issues through her work that we were able to center these events around, so we're truly grateful for her legacy. I want to thank the Board of Legislators of Westchester County for funding these events, our 40 county partners that sign on to support these events, the Lorraine Hansberry Coalition, which is in Croton, and I also want to thank the Humble Bumble book, Otilia, and her daughter Sam, who are outside, who came here today to sell their beautiful bespoke books. Thank you. So, and LMC Media, I can't forget them. I want to, we have an incredible panel of actors today and a director, Kevin R. Free, and Gregory Jost, who is a professor at Fordham and a redlining expert. Kevin R. Free is an award-winning audiobook narrator and an all-around artist person whose work as a director, producer, actor, and playwright have been developed in many places. Most recently, he directed Berta, a Mile Square Theater, at Mile Square Theater, where he's now the artistic director, and Sherlock Holmes, The Final Adventure at Portland Stage. He was just awarded a commission from the Apollo Theater to complete his solo play, A Hill on Which to Drown, which he is writing for Andre de Shields. At the moment, he's playing the role of Guy in Nicole A. Watson's production of Blues for an Alabama Sky at the McCarter Theater Center. And that's Kevin R. Free. There's a lot more to him. We do have a program online on our website. You can see everyone who's been involved in these events and their beautiful biographies. Today we will be reading a scene from A Raisin in the Sun by Lorraine Hansberry and a scene from Clybourne Park by Bruce Norris. So now, with no further ado, Kevin R. Free.
Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Hi, everybody. I'm going to invite the actors out now so that you can see them. I just want you to drink them in. They're so talented. Coming out, everybody. I'll introduce you to them after they do their two scenes. This microphone is so cool. It really is like The Price is Right. It's something. So as Nicole told you, I am Kevin R. Free, and I want to thank Nicole and CURE for having me here to do this program. So we are, if you are here, we know you want to engage in restorative justice. We know you want to talk about racism and institutional racism. So I want to tell you that I see you and I acknowledge you for being here to engage in these conversations. But now I also want to ask you to look at one another. Just look at one another, look in each other's eyes, look at this cast on this stage, see each other. We are not going to turn the lights down low like you're watching a movie, like you're watching people who can't actually see you. We are all in this same room together, and I just want you to make sure that you know and feel that we are all here doing this together, engaging in this conversation, and I want to thank you very much for doing that. So, how many of you have been to the other events that CURE has had, the Five Towns, One Book? Oh, that's great. So this is like a big celebration at the end for us. That's great. Good. And you've been engaging with the work of Lorraine Hansberry, or the life of Lorraine Hansberry. And the first thing we're going to do for you is a scene from A Raisin in the Sun. Have you all read or seen A Raisin in the Sun? Yes, most of us have. I'm going to give you a little background on the scene that we're going to see. This is the scene where The younger family, Walter Lee and Ruth, his wife, and sister Benitha. The mother, Lena Younger, is not going to be in the scene that we show today. But the three of them are getting ready to move to Clybourne Park. They've bought a house. They are about to become landowners. It's a really, really wonderful day. And in the middle of this beautiful, joyous day, Carl Lindner, who is the head of the welcoming committee, the home, what does he call himself? Improvement the Clybourne Park Improvement Association comes to tell them something, and you're going to see that scene. After that scene, I'll talk to you about the next scene we're going to do for you. But for now, I want to give it to the actors to do their thing. Should I turn it stays on or just put it back?
Time. Saturday morning, Saturday moving day, 1 week later. Before the curtain rises, Ruth's voice, a strident, dramatic church alto, cuts through the silence. As the curtain rises, we see that Ruth is alone in the living room, finishing up the family's packing. It is moving day. She is nailing crates of tying cartons. Benitha enters, carrying a guitar case, and watches her exuberant sister-in-law.
Hey! Hi! Honey, look in that package there and see what I found on sale this morning at the South Center.
Ruth gets up and moves to the package and draws out some curtains.
Look at here. Hand-turned hems!
How do you know the window size out there?
Oh, well, they bound to fit something in the whole house. Anyhow, they was too good a bargain to pass by. Oh, Benny, I meant to put a special note on that carton over there. That's your mom's good china, and she wants them to be very careful with it.
I'll do it.
Benitha finds a piece of paper and starts to draw large letters on it.
You know what I'm going to do as soon as I get in that new house?
What?
Honey, I'm going to run me a tub of water up to here. And I'm going to get in it, and I'm going to sit and sit and sit in that hot water, and the first person who knocks to tell me to hurry up and come out
Gets shot at sunrise.
You said it, sister. Honey, they ain't gonna read that. Oh, they ain't gonna read that from no airplane.
I guess I always think that things have more emphasis if they are big, somehow.
You and your brother seem to have that as a philosophy of life. Lord, that man done changed so around here. You know what we did last night? Me and Walter Lee.
What?
We went to the movies. We went to the movies! You know the last time me and Walter went to the movies together?
No.
Me neither. That's how long it's been. But we went last night. The picture wasn't much good, but that didn't seem to matter. We went and we held hands.
Oh, Lord.
We held hands. And you know what?
What?
When we come out of the show, it was late and dark, and all the stores and things was closed up, and it was kind of chilly, and there wasn't many people on the streets, and we were still holding hands. Me and Walter.
You're killing me.
Walter enters with a large package. He puts his package in a corner and puts a phonograph record on the record player.
As the music, soulful and sensuous, comes up, he dances over to Ruth and tries to get her to dance with him.
Oh, talk about old-fashioned Negroes.
What kind of Negroes?
Old-fashioned.
You know, when these new Negroes have their convention, that is going to be the chairman of the Committee on Unending Agitation. great, girl. I believe you are the first person in history of the entire human race to successfully brainwash yourself. I mean, damn, even the NAACP take a holiday sometimes. I could just see that chick some days looking down at some poor cat on the operating table before she starts to slice him and says, by the way, what are your views on civil rights down there?
All right, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
The doorbell sounds. Benita goes to the door and opens it.
How do you do, miss? I'm looking for a Mrs. Lena Younger.
Oh, yes, that's my mother. Excuse me.
She closes the door.
Ruth! Brother! There's a white man at the door.
Benita opens the door again.
Come in, please.
Thank you.
My mother isn't here just now. Is it business?
Yes. Well, other sort.
Have a seat. I'm Mrs. Younger's son. I look after most of her business matters.
Well, my name is Carl Lindner.
Walter Younger. This is my wife, my sister.
How do you do?
What can we do for you, Mr. Lindner?
Well, I am a representative of the Clybourne Park Improvement Association.
Oh, well, why don't you sit your things down on the floor?
Oh, yes, thank you. And as I was saying, I am from the Clybourne Park Improvement Association, and we had it brought to our attention that at the last meeting that you people, or at least your mother, has bought a piece of residence at 406 Clybourne Street.
That's right. You care for something to drink, Ruth? I'm getting Mr. Lindner a big...
Oh, no. Really? Yeah, I mean, thank you very much, but no, thank
Some coffee?
you. Nothing, thank you. Nothing at all. Well, I don't know how much folks know about our organization, but it is one of the community organizations set up to look after, things like block upkeep and special projects, and we also have what we call a New Neighbors Orientation Committee.
Yes, and what do you do?
Well, it's what you might call a sort of welcoming committee, I guess. I mean, I am the chairman of the committee, and we go around and we see the new people who move into the neighborhood and sort of give them the lowdown on the way we do things in Clybourne Park.
Uh-huh.
And we also have a category of what the association calls special community problems.
Yes, and what are some of those?
Oh, girl, let the man talk.
Thank you. I would sort of like to explain this thing my own way. I mean, I want to explain it to you in a certain way.
Go ahead.
Yes, well, I'm going to try to get right to the point. I'm sure we'll all appreciate that in the long run.
Yes.
Be still, man.
Well, let's get right to the point. I am sure that you people must be aware of some of the incidents that have happened in various parts of the city when colored people have moved into certain areas. Because we have what I think in Clybourne Park is going to be a unique type of organization in American community life. Not only do we deplore that kind of thing, but we are trying to do something about it.
Would you like another chair? You don't look comfortable.
No, I'm fine, thank you. We feel that the most of the troubles in this world, when you come right down to it, most of the troubles exist because people just don't sit down and talk to each other.
You can say that again, mister.
That we don't try hard enough in this world to understand the other fellow's problems, the other guy's point of view.
Now that's right.
Yes, that's the way we feel out in Clybourne Park. And that's why I was elected to come here this afternoon and talk to you people. Friendly like. You know, the way people should talk to each other and see if we couldn't come to some way of finding some way to work this thing out. As I say, the whole business is a matter of caring about the other fellow. Anybody can see that you are a nice family. I mean, hard-working folks, honest, I'm sure. Today, everybody knows what it means to be on the outside of something. And of course, there is always somebody who is out to take advantage of people who don't always understand.
What do you mean?
Well, you see, our community is made up of people who have worked hard, worked like the dickens there for years to build this little community. And they're not rich or fancy people, just hard-working, honest people who don't really have much but those little homes. And they dream of the kind of community they want to raise their children in. Now, I don't say we are perfect and there's a lot wrong with some of the things that they want, but you've got to admit that a man, right or wrong, has the right to want to have the neighborhood he lives in be a certain kind of way. And at the moment, the overwhelming majority of our people out there feel that people get along better, take more of a common interest in the life of the community when they share a common background. Now, I want you to believe me when I tell you that race prejudice simply doesn't enter into it. I mean, it is a matter of people, Clybourne Park, believing, rightly or wrongly, as I say, that for the happiness of all concerned, that our Negro families are happier when they live in their own communities.
This, my friends, is the welcoming committee.
Is this what you came marching all the way over here to tell us?
No, we've been having a fine conversation. I hope you'll hear me the whole way through.
Go ahead, man.
You see, in the face of all the things I have said, we are prepared to make your family a very generous offer.
30 pieces and not a coin less.
Our association is prepared through a collective efforts of our people to buy the house from you at a financial gain to your family.
Mercy, ain't this the living God?
All right.
Well,
You through?
I want to give you the exact terms of the financial
We don't want to
arrangement.
hear no exact terms of no arrangements. What I want to know is if you got any more to tell us about getting together.
Well, I don't suppose that you feel...
Look, never mind how I feel. You got any more to say about how people ought to sit down and talk to each other? Get out of my house, man.
But I don't understand why you people are reacting this way. I mean, what do you think you're going to gain by moving into a neighborhood where you're just not wanted? And where some elements, well, people can get awful worked up when they feel that their whole way of life and everything they've ever worked for is threatened.
Get out.
Well, I'm sorry that it went like this.
Get out.
You just can't force people to change their hearts, son.
We all know that scene, right? We all remember that from reading the play, seeing the movies. We remember that. So the next scene is from a play that was inspired by Raisin in the Sun. It was written by a man named Bruce Norris, and that play is called Clybourne Park. And it is, it takes place of the span of a number of decades. The first act, it happens right after Carl Lindner has been to see the Youngers in Hamilton Park, and he comes back to Clybourne Park to speak to the homeowners who have sold their home to the family, the Younger family in Hamilton Park. Has anybody ever seen Clybourne Park? A few of us, okay, great. So this scene played, we have the same Carl Lindner coming back to his friends who live in Clybourne Park with him to talk to them about selling their house to the Younger family. You will see that we have the same Carl Lindner, and then we have these two actors. I'll tell you their names later. I'm going to tell you so that you have space to write them down, to go to their websites, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. hold on, just hold on. These two actors who were playing Walter Lee and Ruth Younger will be playing Francine and Albert, who are, Francine is the maid of the family who lives in the house that was just sold to the Youngers. And this gentleman will be playing Albert, who is Francine's husband, who has just come to pick her up to take her home. Okay, are we ready? You're not ready. Here we are. Here it comes.
I take it, Russ, that you're aware that the Community Association meets the first Tuesday of each month. And as I'm sure you know, Dawn Skinner is part of the steering committee. And somehow it came to Dawn's attention at this late juncture that Ted Driscoll had found a buyer for this house. And I have to say, it did come as something of a shock when Dawn told us what sort of people they were.
What sort of people are they?
Well, I suppose I'm forced to consider the possibility that you actually don't know.
Don't know what?
Well, I mean that they're colored.
Who are?
The family. It's a colored family. So I contacted the family.
Wait.
You're saying Ted never bothered to tell you?
We, sort of gave Ted the free rein on the...
I don't think you're right on this one, Carl.
Oh, but I am. Oh, I've spoken with the family.
Bev!
On the telephone?
Oh, no. As a matter of fact, Betsy and I have just come directly from Hamilton Park.
What is it?
Come here a second.
Now, Russ, you know as well as I do that this is a progressive community.
What's he talking about?
If you take the case of Gilman Grocery, I mean, that's a fine example of how we've all embraced a different way of thinking.
Slow down a second. Bev, get Ted Driscoll on the phone.
What for?
Carl is claiming...
Russ, I met personally with the family, and they are absolutely...
What family?
He claims this family, the family to whom Ted sold the house.
It's a colored family.
Sorry, don't we say Negro now?
I say Negro.
Well, it's only common courtesy, and I'm not trying to tell you how to conduct your business.
And of course I said Negro to them. No, I think we both know what you're trying to do.
And furthermore, I don't think Ted would pull a stunt like that.
Yes, well, we all admire Ted, but I think we would all agree that he's never been accused of putting the community's interest ahead of his own.
Oh, this is ridiculous.
And I don't think any of us have forgotten what happened with the family that moved onto Costner Avenue last year. Now, Costner Avenue is one thing, but Clybourne Street?
Wait. Carl, are you sure?
I was sitting with them not 2 hours ago.
But isn't it possible that they're, I don't know, Mediterranean?
They are 100%. And I don't know how much time any of you have spent in Hamilton Park, but Betsy was waiting in the car, and I can tell you there are some unsavory characters.
Carl.
But in the case of Gelman's, I think there was some mistrust at first, having been Kopechne's market for such a long time. But in the end of all, Murray Gelman found a way to fit in. And fitting into a community is really what it all comes down to. Now, some would say change is inevitable, and I can support that. And if it's change for the better, but I'll tell you what I can't support, and that's disregarding the needs of the people who live in a community.
But don't they have needs too?
Don't who?
The family.
Which family?
The ones who are
The
moving.
purchasers.
Well, I mean, in principle, don't we all deserve to? Shouldn't we all have the opportunity to?
In principle, no question.
But you can't live in principle, can you? You gotta live in a house.
And so do they.
Not in this house, they don't.
But here's the real question.
And what happened to love thy neighbor if we're being so principled?
Oh, they would become our neighbors.
And what about the neighbors you already have?
I
Beth?
care about them too.
Well, I'm afraid you can't have it both ways.
Okay. Assuming...
Wait, why not?
Well, do the boundaries of the neighborhood extend indefinitely? I mean, who shall we invite next? The Red Chinese?
But the key question
No,
is this.
no. Why can't we have both ways?
Darling, I came to talk to Russ.
Why not? If we could benefit someone.
But would they benefit?
Well, if we could make them our neighbors.
But they won't be your neighbors, Deb. You're the ones moving away.
The question is, and it's one worth examining.
Anyway, let's not drag this out ad infinitum.
Russ.
1 second, if I might. Sorry, Francine, is it?
Yes, sir.
Francine, we've just been having a little conversation here, and I was wondering if maybe you could spare us a couple minutes of your time.
What good does that do? I mean, go next door, talk to the Olsons, talk to those who stand to lose.
I want to pose a little hypothetical to you. What if we said this? Let's imagine you and your husband here. Let's say that the two of you have the opportunity to move from your current home into a different neighborhood, and let's just say the neighborhood happened to be this one.
Well, I don't think that we would financially.
Well, but for the sake of argument, I mean, say you had the wherewithal. Would this be the sort of neighborhood you'd find an attractive place in which to live?
This is all so silly.
It's a very nice neighborhood.
Oh, no, I'm asking, would the two of you, would your family, I assume you have children?
3 children.
Oh, super. Okay, so with your children, might this be the sort of place, bearing in mind that they too would stand to be affected?
This is confusing things. I mean, it's confusing the issue.
It's a very lovely neighborhood.
No, be honest. We want you to say.
I think what Jim is asking, in his way.
He means living next to white folks.
Well, yes. Well, Francine and I have, over the years, the two of us have shared so many wonderful. Do you remember that time that the squirrel came in through the window?
Yes, I do.
Oh, that was just the silliest. I mean, the two of us were just both hysterical.
Think of it this way.
We still laugh about that.
I think that you'd agree, I'm assuming that in a world that there exist certain differences. Agreed?
What sort of differences?
Well, that people live differently
Yes,
from one another.
I agree with that.
Different customs, different foods even.
But I'll say this.
I like spaghetti and meatballs.
You do find differences in modes of worship. If you take First Presbyterian, now that's a church down in Hamilton Park, and I've taken fellowship there, and I can tell you, the differences are notable.
Jim.
Well, not a value judgment, apples and oranges. Just as how we have our organ here at St. Thomas for accompaniment. Whereas at First Presbyterian, they prefer a piano and occasionally, tambourines.
What's wrong with tambourines?
Oh, nothing wrong.
I like tambourines.
I like tambourines as much as the next person.
Oh, let me ask this. Excuse me, Francine, was it?
Yes, sir.
Francine, may I ask you, do you ski?
Do I
Do you, your husband, either of you,
ski?
downhill ski?
We don't ski. No.
And this is my point. The children who attend St. Stanislaus, once a year we take middle schoolers up to Indian Head Mountain. And I can tell you, in all the time I've been there, I have not once seen a colored family on those slopes. Now, what accounts for that? Certainly not deficit in ability, so what I have to conclude is that for some reason there is just something about the pastime of skiing that doesn't appeal to the Negro community. And feel free to prove me wrong.
Carl?
But you'll have to show me where to find the skiing Negroes.
Carl!
Can we modulate our voices?
It's sold, Carl. The house is sold.
I understand that.
The ink is dry.
And we all understand your reasons, and no one holds that against you.
Truck's coming on Monday.
Fully aware.
And that's all there is to it.
However, There's one possibility.
No.
If you'll hear me out,
Don't
Russ,
see the point.
Because we went ahead and made a counter offer to these people.
Who did?
The community association.
An offer on this house?
Very reasonable offer.
Well, but they just bought it.
As
Carl.
opposed to the amount for which you offered the property, Russ, which was far below the assessor's value.
Well, we're entitled to give it away if that's our prerogative.
Well, for this type of residence, all of which is neither here nor there, since the family rejected our offer. However,
What are we
Don
talking
has
about
pointed
this?
out to me that as the seller of this property, you do have a 60-day option to place it in a receivership with the transacting bank to indemnify yourself against liability. Now that's generally commercial property, but in this instance, I believe... I think that inasmuch as Ted deceived you about the buyers, that the bank could still halt the sale and it would be a simple matter of signature.
Prefer it.
Russ, if I could finish.
No, I'd prefer it if you didn't.
And for all we know, this family could be perfectly lovely.
That's hardly the point.
Well, maybe it's a point to consider.
And Bev, I'm not here to solve the society's problems. I'm simply telling you what will happen, and it will happen as follows. First, one family will leave, then another, and another. And each time they do, the values of these properties will decline. And once that property begins, once they break those eggs, Bev, all the king's horses, etc. And some of us, you see, those who don't have the opportunity to simply pick up and move at the drop of a hat, then those folks are left holding the bag, and it is a fairly worthless bag at that point.
I don't like the tone this is taking.
Okay, I'll tell you what.
Let's imagine if the tables were turned. Suppose a number of white families were marching into your community. Well, actually, that might be an advantage, but
Carl!
You do see my point.
Now,
sorry.
No, you need to stop now.
Sorry, maybe I've not handled with the
It's all right,
utmost
it's all right.
delicacy.
No, but maybe it's time to let it
I
drop.
don't mean to turn this into a public referendum. But you do understand.
No. That's it. You hear me? Done. All done.
Well, Russ, if I might, I have a...
No.
If I could just say this.
No, Carl.
Well, if you'd let me, Russ.
No more.
Bev, I get the impression your husband is telling me I'm not permitted to speak.
Don't think it's a good idea.
Well, Russ, I'm going to ask you to at least keep an open mind.
Carl, what did I just ask you?
Well, I think you're being tad unreasonable.
Well, I think we've reached the end of this particular discussion.
Is that right?
I'm afraid it is.
Just like that?
Just like that.
Then what about this?
Carl?
Well, I believe the Constitution endows me the right to speak.
Well, then you're going to have to go and do that in your own house.
Bev, he's not being serious, is he?
Carl?
Am I being silenced?
I'm not going to ask you again.
Well, this is a new experience for me.
So be it.
A bit like the Soviet Union. I'm truly surprised.
Well,
And a little
surprised.
disappointed.
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Real shame for all concerned.
Well, that's the way things go sometimes.
Apparently so.
Anyway, appreciate you stopping by.
I see. Very well.
I like to call this genre of play the messy white people play. It's one of my favorite things to watch. People twist themselves into knots trying to figure out who's the best colonizer. And they did a great job, didn't they? Yeah. So one of the things that I was sharing with the cast when we started rehearsal earlier today, I'm going to share that observation with you, and then I'm going to share an observation that I just noticed watching these two scenes back to back. Well, the first thing is, I once played the role of Albert in Clybourne Park, and one of my favorite experiences of doing the play was being a black person on stage playing a marginalized character, but being able to watch white people twist themselves into knots. Being able to watch this mess and knowing that the audience in Portland, Oregon, where I was doing the play, would be mostly white, watching black people watch white people be messy was really exciting for me. And then having a talk back after every single show to talk about redlining and housing discrimination in Portland, Oregon, it was one of the finest experiences of my career, just because, yeah, I got to act on stage, but then I got to talk about the world. I didn't have to talk about how I memorized my lines. I get to talk about people not embracing their community, which I think is ultimately what happens when Carl Lindner says to them, this is what's gonna happen if they move to this neighborhood. First one family goes, then another family goes, then another family goes. And what that is not the black people's fault for moving into the neighborhood. It is the white people's fault for not embracing their neighbors and not embracing, most importantly, the community. And that they are giving up their own legacy just because they don't wanna live alongside certain kinds of people. Yeah. The other thing I noticed watching today, because I've read, when I did Clybourne Park, I've read both of these plays a lot, but never did the scenes back to back. We never did that. Remember when Carl Lindner said to the priest, well, of course I called them Negro to their faces. Of course that's what I did. I say Negro, and I called them Negro to their faces. It was a lie. He called them colored. And I had not noticed that before. Anyway, I just was like, he's messy and a liar. So I want to introduce you to these actors so that you know who they are. You can follow them on social media. You can follow they're all brilliant, brilliant people. And I want you to know who they are. And then I'll introduce you to the main event of the night. Not that you're not the main event. You were my main event. From your left, stage right to left, this is Jack Utrata. Jack Utrata. This is Seann Gallagher. This is Leenya Rideout. Antu Yacob. Russell Jordan. Russell Jordan. I said I'd sing it. Kailah S. King. And Michael Patrick Sullivan. These are all members of your community. Some live in Westchester, some live in the Bronx, some live in Manhattan, some live in Brooklyn. We are all members of your community, so embrace us. Does any of you have anything you'd like to say that are you doing anything that they can come see? Anybody? Antu.
Okay, all right. Next week, if you happen to be in the New Brunswick area at New Brunswick Performing Arts Center in New Jersey, it's a trek from here. But if you happen to be in the area, they're doing something called the Genesis Festival, and I have a solo show next Friday that I've written at 7 p.m. But if you go to Crossroads Theater Company's website, you will get all the information about the Genesis Festival. So even if you don't see my show, you can see some of the new work that is happening on another night during the week.
Yeah. Some brilliant people are a part of that.
Yeah.
Clearly you. Tylee Scheider, Antu Yacob,
Richard Wesley.
Richard Wesley.
I'm familiar with Richard Wesley, but he has a new play that he's collaborated, I think, with Tylee Scheider.
Yes, called The Gospel Woman. That one? Is that the play? That's Tylee's individual piece.
But then Richard Wesley, who's a brilliant writer and filmmaker, he teaches at NYU. He collaborated on a piece, I think, about the history of an area of Montclair, New Jersey, that served as a, part of the Underground Railroad.
Ah.
So they created monologues based on the research they found.
Very cool.
And I think that's happening on I think it's happening on Sunday. But go to their website and you'll get information on all
Crossroads Theater Company. They are the only black theater company in New Jersey.
To have won a Tony Award ever.
Ever.
In the history of Tony Awards.
In the history of yeah.
But I don't know if they're the only one in New Jersey, but I know that they're the only one to have won a Tony in the history of their company.
They've been around for a long time too, making black theater. Anybody else?
I'd like to mention something I think people in this room would be interested in. I'm involved in an organization called Project Untitled. And we are a group called we're doing a project called the Untitled Othello Project in residence at Sacred Heart University in Fairfield, Connecticut. Some of the, its artistic director and leader is Keith Hamilton Cobb, who some of you may know. And a lot of most of it is streamed to the students and streamed outside of the college. But a lot of it is available on YouTube if you'd like to see what kind of work we do. We look at Othello through the prism of race and misogyny and gender issues. And we've created a cutting of Othello which tries to move and we don't know if we're successful, tries to move Othello to the center and look at the racist issues in that play. And it was written in 1602, so you can imagine we've got our work cut out for us. But please visit the website and look up the Untitled Othello Project.
Beautiful. Anyone else? Jack.
Yeah, I'm also a writer, and I just had a pilot that was sort of greenlit. We won a grant to film some of it. It's called 11 Blocks to Go. It's a love letter to friendship, specifically the ride or die friendships. And it's about these two rambunctious 30-somethings who create a pact for self-betterment, but it's really burdened by damaging secrets. And it's a beautiful journey, a heartbreaking journey, and it's sort of my baby at the moment. So I'm looking for that. It's 11blockstogo.com. If you want to follow along, we've won a couple of awards and stuff for the writing, but we're finally getting to that stage where we get to film some of it. So I'm excited for that.
And is there a funding campaign for any of these the projects that you all mentioned?
Not yet, but to come.
Okay, so go to the website. You know where it is. Keep visiting so you can give some of your money. Why not? And Russell, yes?
I'll be very, very brief. Josh Klein, he's an artist who right now is tackling global warming, and he has a piece that's opening at the Whitney in a few weeks, and there is a free admission day, and as part of that, it reimagines a future state in the United States where we have global catastrophe from global warming, and part of that exhibit is he created these fictional characters who talk about how that weather event impacted them. So it feels kind of close, but it's also a warning. So just go to my Instagram on that. And if anyone is into sci-fi, I've joined the cast of a podcast called Visionaries. And it's season 2 that's starting in the very soon. And it talks about a world in which people are classified based on their eye color. And it's very, very interesting. So it's set very in like sci-fi, but you know, listen to season 1 because season 2 is about to drop. So I'm very pleased with that. But on Instagram, Russ Jordan, I have some other stuff. I know she and I are going to be working together soon on some things. But yeah, just follow us on Russ Jordan and you'll see all that stuff. So thank you.
Instagram too.
And oh yeah.
Do they have bios?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Nicole will share everybody's info. Oh, all right. So let's give them another round of applause. A lot of times we think, you know, actors are just actors, but we made sure that we curated a group of actors who also care about the world. So I'm so glad that you were able to see them today. You're dismissed. Come out and watch us. Come out and watch Gregory. Now I'm going to introduce you to the main event, everybody. Hey, yeah, take a bow or wave to your fans. Amazing. You're amazing. Okay, so this is the part of the show where I read Gregory's bio, but I don't have it. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I have part of it. Now I have it. I only had one page. It's weird. Yeah, it was only one page. Okay, here it is. Gregory Jost. Look at him. There he goes. You can come up these stairs to talk to us. That's fine. Yeah. Yeah, we're casual here, clearly. Gregory Jost is a Bronx-based organizer, educator, and facilitator with expertise in the history of systemic and structural inequality and strategies for racial equity and justice through community reinvestment and economic democracy. Look at you. I'm so excited. I mean, I knew this, but I also reading it is a whole thing. He is an adjunct faculty member in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Fordham University, where he focuses on the Bronx's history with redlining and grassroots approaches to systemic issues. Gregory's work at Banana Kelly Community Improvement Association, another community improvement association, but like an actual community improvement association, in the South Bronx, keeps him grounded in current campaigns and coalitions fighting back against the extractive economy and fighting forward for community ownership and wealth-building opportunities. He has extensive experience co-designing curricula, interactive exhibits, databases, and popular education workshops. He is currently writing a book. Look at you. Thank you for taking the time. He's currently writing a book on the Bronx's battles against redlining while working to bring a community development credit union to the Bronx. Welcome, Gregory Jost.
Very good. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm going to get the screen moving here while... but I'll introduce myself really briefly while this is coming up because it takes a second. I will say just really briefly, I come to this because I am the child of a interracial marriage. And I grew up in a very segregated part of northern New Jersey, where, not that different than here in some ways, it's hard to fit in, hard to find a place where you belong when everybody's segregated by race. Now, the area where I grew up, right next to Patterson, is really diverse, extremely diverse, but all the towns were really segregated. And I went to this little private Christian school that had people from all the different towns, and so even though it was very much a predominantly white institution, it was like, oh, here you can actually have people get together and do different things, but you all go back and live in different neighborhoods, you ride different school buses, et cetera, et cetera. And I was like, there's still no room for belonging. So I had oops, I just did something weird here. I had a real interesting experience when I came to the Bronx for college. I went to Fordham starting in the 90s, and I think I'm gonna hit this button really quick. And I got to meet people living and working in diverse communities. And I found out that a lot of the folks who I started working with had been part of community organizing efforts in the 1970s and 80s that were actively working against redlining, as the neighborhoods in the Bronx were redlining for a lot of the same reasons that kind of came up in here. So it was just really an amazing opportunity for me to get connected in a different kind of way and get connected to different people and different type of work. So I'm gonna share a little less about that work, although it's really important because I think everyone has been engaging in a lot of different kinds of work. Like, what do we do about this, right? This is messy. I love that we're doing this kind of conversation, right? And there's so much more that we can do, right? Like these are long-standing, intractable issues, but they're also everything. All the problems here are humanly constructed. None of this is innate to us. These are all human constructs. So I like to keep standing in that place. Hang on, give me 1 sec so I focus on doing the tech side for about 30 seconds, and then I'll come right back. See, I have very specific instructions that I'm following, so there we go. Okay, awesome. So yes, I am also working on a book, and so I'm excited because a lot of the stuff that I put into this presentation, I've done a lot of different talks before. Usually they're in the Bronx, or I've done work in a number of other cities as well, but being really engrossed in some of the research I've been doing lately, this is a lot of new stuff. So this is kind of debut, so it's exciting, and I'm a little bit nervous, but it's, bear with me in it, because I think it's really important, and this is kind of just understanding some of the origins behind it. So I'm pulling some of this stuff from the, oops, here we go, from the Instagram page. So background, of course, for northern cities is really, we can, talk about the Great Migration. Really, I love to bring in the arts. So thank you, Nicole, and the company and all the artists today, right? Because we got to bring in arts. A lot of this history is pretty terrible in a lot of different ways. And it's really important to bring kind of whatever we kind of like joy, healing, creativity, like the type of experience here, right? Beauty into the scene too. And think about how are we going to work past this? How are we going to talk through this? This is Jacob Lawrence painting and a quote from Isabel Wilkerson. Anyone here read The Warmth of Other Suns? Excellent, excellent, excellent. I got to meet her at a different event on fair housing and affordable housing. Really amazing, amazing human being, and I love her writing. I want to share a little bit too that in kind of talking to folks about anti-redlining organizing and then being part of it, it's easy, especially in the Bronx, it's easy to like jump into like all the bad stuff, and then you're like, oh, wait. I learned a really important lesson is like, oh, it didn't necessarily all start off in terrible ways. And there is a lot of really beautiful history to go back and find out also what is lost over time through these systems and structures, right? That kind of pull people apart, discourage ways that people might actively be connecting, right? Because for everybody who's engaged in some kind of division and kind of nastiness, there's also some people out there who are like, can we do the right thing? Can we do the right thing? And part of this came out of what at Fordham we call the Bronx African American History Project that started now about 20 years ago when folks were in the Bronx were looking for some of the history. Guess what? They went to the Bronx County Historical Society and they wanted to find about the history of some of the Black community in the South Bronx and other parts of the Bronx. And the Historical Society had almost nothing about Black folks in the Bronx except for people who were enslaved and files on crime. It's pretty awful, right? But you had folks in the neighborhood. In fact, there were two of the leading folks were both, they both passed on now, but they're both Korean War vets, Black Korean War vets, who were familiar with some of this history, and they started talking to their friends, and they knew that there were other things. But they realized that they had to actually create together a history project and bring everybody together and collect the materials that they've had. And so I'm going to share some of the things that we found because it also extends up into Westchester. And I think it's really exciting. This is actually some newer materials that we found. I won't take credit for finding them, but I've been digging through a lot of them at the Bronx County Historical Society archives. We have some new folks on staff that are really excellent, but it's an old institution. It's an old white-run institution for the most part that is also resistant to change. So there's a lot of work that keeps happening inside of it. And so one of the products of that history that's been happening in the oral histories is this book called Before the Fires. And there's a really great telling of this story of how the Bronx and the neighborhoods in Morrisania especially became this multiracial, integrated, working class neighborhood that actually lasted for about a generation, from the late 1930s until about the early 1960s. Most parts of the country, like we're watching what happens here, if there was any kind of integration, it was very short-lived. But there are some exceptions. Now, it turns out that in this case, a lot of that had to do with some of the organizing that was happening for folks that had been members of the Socialist and Communist Party. And they were exposed to a different kind of Marxist belief in class solidarity that worked across, at least was trying to work across racial lines. And in the onset of the Great Depression, there are a number of rent strikes, and these are the folks who are out organizing, and they have signs like black and white, unite and fight. If we're gonna do the rent strikes and actually win, right? If you're gonna win along class lines, you have to unite across race, otherwise you will lose. And that's the story of most of the union organizing and why it usually loses in this country, because as one of the trainings I went to some years ago by the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, they have this quote that says, race is the glue that holds class together. So we keep class divisions as they are because people are easily divided by race. In this case, you also had a lot of folks in the Bronx who were mostly Jewish, Eastern European Jews specifically, because there's all these different divisions and hierarchies as well, who were also in solidarity with the Scottsboro Boys in Alabama. And it was the Jewish Legal Defense Fund that came to their aid, and so there was a lot of also solidarity at that moment in the 1930s. And so even folks who were not part of that direct organizing were witness to it. And so there was a strong vibe of like, it's like we're actually gonna do this thing where we will, with the increasing vacancies in apartments, because this is 1930s, they're also building all these new buildings along the Grand Concourse. Anybody here Bronx people? Just checking, a few Bronx people. So you know a lot of this history anyway. They're building all these new buildings on the Grand Concourse, so folks who lived along the 3rd Avenue L, which was the original subway line to the Bronx, elevated train, are moving, who can, those of higher means, are moving out to these fancier elevator apartment buildings, and they're opening up all these vacancies around like Longwood Ave and Prospect and 3rd Avenue and Morris High School neighborhood, right? Morris High School actually at this point in time becomes what we think is the most racially integrated high school in the country during the 1940s and 50s. And there's a lot of great history that comes out of the neighborhoods, especially the music scene. I'm not gonna go too far into it, but like it becomes a satellite in many ways of the Harlem Renaissance. And there are these great jazz clubs. If you're a Nancy Wilson fan, she actually gets discovered in Club 845 on Boston Road. And Thelonious Monk's family lives here in the neighborhood. Neil deGrasse Tyson's parents, this is where they live and grow up. Well, his dad, this is where he grows up. So there's, as well as Colin Powell, who I think is the more famous of this crew, right, in these neighborhoods. And what is actually online, and if you go on the Bronx County Historical Society website, this is really great stuff if you love like archival stuff. It's The Listener. And so this is a Black-run newspaper started in the South Bronx in 1938, and it runs at least into the early 1940s, and they've digitized 4 copies so far, 4 issues. And so I just pulled out some really fun headlines and articles and ads that you can see, because even though this is a Bronx-based paper, they're serving the Black community that is spread out in these different satellites of Harlem, right? Harlem is the Mecca, and you've got folks, right, in Morrisania, and you've got folks in the Northeast Bronx, and you've got folks in New Rochelle, and Mount Vernon, and in Yonkers. And here we go, I'll just share some of them. Some of these great headlines. Housing project soon to be ready. 1,650 applicants have already been filed. And this is Mulford Gardens Housing Project of Yonkers. And talking about the struggles that folks are facing trying to find low rent housing in Mount Vernon and other sections of Westchester, and in the Bronx as well. And I love, because there's all the flows. And actually the Bronx used to be part of Westchester County, if you go back in time long enough. And you can see they're also addressing workers' conditions. For a lot of their readership are folks who work in the first folks who were the select colored families, as they were called, in terms of the ads, I shouldn't say as they call it, as they were recruited in the advertisements in the Amsterdam News, were folks who the men in the family either worked as Pullman porters or for the post office. These are the most common jobs that you would see. And you see they're talking about like the jobs that better conditions in their organizing. They had sections on, as you can see here, Mount Vernon News, Yonkers News, New Rochelle News, pulled in a couple of the different ads because I love to see what were the shops, right? Some of these are Black-owned stores and others might be white-run stores that are also trying to advertise to Black customers. So you could see, and if you know any of these places, I don't know, but it sounds real interesting because they got a New Year's special at Dick's Sandwich Shop, which Black Eyed Peas and Hogs Head 2 bring good luck all year to you on South 7th Avenue in Mount Vernon. I love this stuff. Here's a few more ads. There's a church directory. I'm assuming these are all pretty much black churches, and I'm sure many of them are still running today. I don't know if that's what you say about churches, running in service, right? Continue on today. Bishop Kyle's in White Plains, and there's a White Plains baby contest. I'm not really sure what that's about, but I see mental hygiene group, something, so. They're covering international news, right? World War II, the Nazis, the Soviets. They're talking about lynchings in the South. They're pulling in tidbits from the West Indies, right? We got a big West Indian community in this area that's part of their readership, is very much in there, and they're talking about India demanding full freedom. Covering the arts, Marian Anderson, and sports. Arthur Cryer goes on to be a very successful, famous sports journalist. This is where he got his start, writing about Joe Louis here. Anyway, so there you have kind of like, this is, I'll just pause here for a second. So I'm using it as an example of really talking about the success that you see in some neighborhoods. There are a few different places around the country where you have some integrated spaces and people figuring out how are we gonna live together, how are we gonna work together. However, they're really the exception to the rule. In most cases, there are a lot of, we're dealing with this very long history that continues in its different, things may improve a little bit at a time, but it's very gradual, it's very slow, and it traces back into a whole history of colonialism, dispossession of native land, slavery, right? The extraction of land, resources, labor, and this kind of ideas around property. And there's this article written in the 1990s by Cheryl Harris in the Harvard Law Review about whiteness as property, which I think is really helpful to think about and conceptualize, because what it is about, as she asserts here, is that they share a common premise, whiteness and property, which is the right to exclude. And by exclusion, you preserve value by creating a form of scarcity. And if you follow like the cryptocurrency, whatever, I mean, I'm just saying it's crazy, right? Because all they're trying to do is manufacture scarcity, which is what creates value. But it's made up, right? But you can enforce it through violence, which is pretty much the ultimate enforcement. But it's still a manufactured exclusivity that creates scarcity, right? And Harris argues that whiteness guaranteed originally, in terms of the United States, right? And guaranteed you the right to own property because you had to be white to own property, which then also allowed you to vote. And it afforded you the right to not be enslaved. So it was a commodity. It was a piece of property. And only whites possessed whiteness, obviously, but it bears stating a highly valued and exclusive form of property. That's her quote. And this is a painting called American Progress from 1872 by John Gast that kind of, I think, is a great visual of what white folks thought about their role, right? Manifest destiny, heading west, we're gonna bring civilization, we're gonna bring a higher use to the land and bring light into the darkness. A lot of assumptions going on in here. And there's all these different justifications. Many of them are these kind of false biblical narratives, like if you ever heard of the curse of Ham, not gonna go into it, but crazy stuff, right? That soon gives way in this Enlightenment period to this new justifications, such as craniology. There's different forms of pseudoscience, right? Pseudoscience is a very powerful tool because you claim it is real and truthful when in fact we know it's not. But given the science of the day, it becomes very much mainstream. And I'm bringing it up because it carries forward into this era, right? It's setting a foundation for these justifications of who is better, who is not. One of my friends, a colleague at Fordham University, Janine Hill Fletcher, in her book, The Sin of White Supremacy, she calls this sliding scale humanity. Du Bois calls this the problem of the color line, all the rankings, right? And you see all these great philosophers, theologians from Europe, Kant, Hegel, Hume, Locke, right? They all live inside of these. Those are maybe not their most famous writings, but if you look at their writings, they're inside the same dominant narrative. They believe this stuff fully, they're finding reasons to justify it, and this stuff carries forward. it's very much embedded in the history of anthropology, of course. And I found this in a dictionary up at a writing retreat center I was at, and it's a 1938 Funk and Wagnalls dictionary. And I share it because 1938 is the same year that we're gonna just talk about in a moment, where they're creating a lot of the redlining maps. And if you look up the term miscegenation in the 1938 dictionary, they're still using a table that was created in 1854 about categorizing people. I'm not gonna read all the things because it's pretty awful, but I just want you to understand they're using the pseudoscience of 85 years earlier, which 1938 is about exactly 85 years ago. It's like us using the science of 1938 and believing it and putting it in the dictionary. Now the term progressive, which I've been just like digging into a bunch recently, which is like, ooh, it's really messy and gross. Because progress in the progressive era of the late 19th and early 20th century is really, it's terrible. It's really about how do we make the human race better? And you cannot separate it from the eugenicists and the eugenics movement of who should be allowed to immigrate into the US and who should not be allowed to, and who should be encouraged to reproduce and who should not be, and who will undergo forced sterilizations. And it really even ties into public health programs and really good things that we have today, right? You have the settlement house movement. You have, Planned Parenthood comes out of this as well. Like, it's not to say that all these things are still bad, but they come out of the same origins. Their origin stories are very messy. And we'll see the same thing for things like the American Economics Association and real estate and banking, right? They're all come out of this foundation. And social gospel theology, which becomes the foundation for liberation theology, is also tied up in here. And you can see here's like a eugenics and health exhibit. So this guy, you've probably never heard of him. Anyone ever heard of Madison Grant? He gets written out of history, but he's very prominent right in this area, going back to the very early 20th century. He helps build the Bronx River Parkway, the Bronx Zoo. He's really good friends with Teddy Roosevelt. He's a conservationist. He helped save the American bison from extinction. Not everything he does is bad. But he also writes this book called The Passing of the Great Race. And he introduces this term of like the Nordic race, and it's this and this and this. And guess who picks it up and loves it and has it translated into German by the Third Reich is Adolf Hitler. He's like, wow, you guys in America know what you're doing. You know what you're talking about. I think we'll take this and we'll implement it. Right, so the Nazis have their presence in the US at this time, and it's only like when we get into the war and start to uncover like, oh, this is quite a slippery slope. This is really a slippery slope of this eugenic stuff and everything. So Madison Grant dies right before this all happens. Like he dies in like the mid-30s, 36, 37. And people are like, we do not want to be associated with him because Hitler calls his book his Bible. But he's also involved with some really gross stuff. Like they had a Congolese pygmy on exhibit at the Bronx Zoo once, named Otabenga. These are like the things that they did back then were really like, these lines were awful. Right? Yeah. So he gets written out of history, but there are other folks who are maybe not quite as seen as quite as extreme, who stay on and are training this next generation. And I think this guy, Richard Ely, I think it's Ely. I haven't heard anyone say if it's Eli or Ely, but E-L-Y. He is in the same circles. And again, perhaps not as extreme of a eugenicist, but still believing in the ideas of eugenicism. He is a theologian on the side. He's friends with Walter Rauschenbusch, who's kind of the founder of social gospel theology. And he's the founder, one of the co-founders of the American Economics Association. And he really invents this school of real estate valuation. And he's recruited to lead the School of Economic, Political Science and History at University of Wisconsin. And he really becomes like, obsessed with like figuring out these ideas around land and value. How do we do appraisals, for instance? This stuff didn't exist before, right? Because very few people owned land. It was the ruling class, right? We were the folks that, there was no middle class. I mean, a very small middle class. You had farmers, but farmers' land value is a very different thing than residential property, right? My dad's side of the family are farmers from Kansas. They're like, yeah, there's a whole history of land grants and all this other stuff, but it's like, it's a different thing than who your neighbors are, how far your houses are apart, because you got one house and a lot of land around it, right? But now in terms of residential real estate, how do you appraise it and really turn housing and land into a financial commodity for the masses? So he starts the Institute for Research in Land Economics at the University of Wisconsin in 1920, and over the years, through the classes that he teaches and the associations that he runs, he mentors and offers his guidance to a number of different people who are going to be at the forefront of determining economic policy for the federal government during the New Deal. And I'll come back to them a little bit in a second, but Morton Bodfish at the Federal Home Loan Bank, Philip Nurskin, who's the director of the Homeowners Loan Corporation, Frederick Babcock, and Homer Hoyt with the Federal Housing Administration. I'm not saying these people are all evil, inherently evil or anything, but they're products of their time. And they're taking the different ideas, the eugenicism, the different sliding scale humanity of it, and formalizing it into another kind of form of pseudoscience. That's not craniology, but it's about real estate valuation. And how do you appraise property? It is considered a science. They're gonna also borrow from life insurance. I'll come back to that in a second. It was interesting when they were talking here in the scene in Clybourne Park about like, what are the people gonna do? How are they gonna respond? Look, you know, this becomes a central component in the early days of real estate valuation too, or not even the valuation side, but zoning ordinances and the powers that be. And in the city of Baltimore in 1910, so Baltimore, anyone here a Baltimore person? Baltimore, what I've heard, because we got to do some work there around kind of the history of redlining in Baltimore, is considered the northernmost southern city and the southernmost northern city. That's real interesting in that sense. By the way, there's a really great book that came out about 2 years ago called The Black Butterfly by Dr. Lawrence Brown at Morgan State in Baltimore about this whole, if you want to read into the history of Baltimore, it's really, I highly recommend it. So they passed a racial zoning ordinance in 1910, which is about saying, oh, housing built in this district must be for whites only, and housing built in this district must be for blacks only. It's hard to enforce, it's a bit of a mess, but part of their justification is we want to prevent racial riots. And of course, race riots pre-1960s are always, almost pretty much always, started by white people, right? They're anti-black riots. And we see an uptick in them right towards the tail end of World War I, with returning veterans who've gone off to fight for the US military and coming back home, and like the fight continues. Here it is, and guess what? We have the Red Summer, 1919, riots all around the country. Chicago, Washington, D.C. 1921, we just celebrated the 100th anniversary, terrible anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre, where white folks riot, and they actually drop homemade bombs on the Black Wall Street neighborhood of Greenwood, right? So this is happening around the country, terrible violence, and the real estate industry is starting to respond and saying, wait, we need to encourage segregation because we don't want this violence to happen. As opposed to holding white people responsible for violence, it's responding to the fact and it's accepting the fact that this violence is just gonna happen. Not that different than what happens in Clybourne Park. And then you have the real estate industry, which is also just getting off the ground, and you have the National Association of Real Estate Boards, they published their very first textbook. Again, this is the formalizing and standardizing of a lot of existing ideas. But now they're like, we're gonna write a textbook. What's gonna go in the textbook? And it's called Principles of Real Estate. And this is how, to become a licensed real estate broker, you must read the textbook, take the test, pass the test to get your license and certification. And you can read the highlighted section here, which says in the textbook, the colored people certainly have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but they must recognize the economic disturbance which their presence in a white neighborhood causes, that disturbance, and forego their desire to split off from the established district where the rest of their race lives. So here it's being codified. That's all that's happening, right? It's taking an idea that people already, the white folks are already thinking, and we're gonna put it in straight language. And, right, this is 1920s into the 1930s. People are much more explicit in their racism, right? So you're taking ideas that are much more explicitly racist, but sometimes it starts to become more and more hidden, right? Jim Crow South, you're able to put that explicit racism on display. In the North, the explicit racism still lives, but it lives inside the documents and the textbooks and the maps, right? They're not putting it out necessarily out on the street. It's a little bit of like an unspoken thing, but the same racism is there behind the scene. So this moment also with the New Deal, right, it's gonna create this whole opportunity for more and more people to become homeowners. We go from pre-New Deal to post-World War II, a very short amount of time in this country, from a nation that was about 1/3 homeowners and 2/3 renters, to 2/3 homeowners and 1/3 renters, right? This is how we become middle-class America. But it's only because the federal government decides they wanna back homeownership as a policy and a tool of economic mobility for certain people. Also to squash any of those kind of uprisings of socialism and communism, right? Because how do you get people to be good capitalists is you have to own a piece of the pie. So for all these different reasons in the New Deal, we see a big push towards homeownership. And the way to make homes more affordable, because, all right, we were also in a foreclosure crisis during the Great Depression. People losing their jobs, can't afford, right? One way to make mortgages much more affordable is to extend the term. So if you owned a home before the New Deal and you went to a bank to get a loan, the bank's gonna give you a loan that's a 5 to 7 year adjustable rate mortgage. It's kind of the same terms like if you're buying commercial real estate or apartment buildings, that's how the banks still do it. There was no such thing as a 30-year fixed rate mortgage until the federal government steps in and through the Homeowners Loan Corporation and then the Federal Housing Administration, they decide they're gonna create this new longer term mortgage product. But with the longer term mortgage product, they've also become obsessed with what will the value of this home be, not just in 5 years from now, but 30 years from now. So it becomes really speculative. What's gonna happen? What's gonna change in this neighborhood over this very long period of time? So who do they turn to that does long-term kind of speculative science? But life insurance companies. How are they the actuaries who are predicting how long somebody is gonna live and charging them all the rates? And the life insurance companies are real interesting, and there's a whole other history you can go into because I won't go into it here, but I'll just say really briefly, the life insurance companies are told that they cannot just charge higher rates based on race, but they start using all the other things because at this moment in time, in the very early 20th century, life expectancy for black folks is much lower than for white folks, especially non-immigrant white folks, for native, they say, native white folks. So they find other ways to do it. So they're borrowing a lot of the different ways and tools. And some life insurance companies, the mainstream big white ones, stop offering policies to black Americans. We don't want to comply with these standards that we're not allowed to charge higher rates. So you have the growth of black-owned insurance companies, life insurance companies that spring up all around the country. And I like to use this photo too because I'm a big fan of Charles T. Harris. And I encourage you, if you want to see like the beauty of black communities in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, check out the Hill District in Pittsburgh. And Charles T. Harris, they called him One-Shot Harris also was his other nickname, because he could just like pop into a room, get a photo, and be out. And you didn't even know, you didn't even see him. But he has all these amazing photos of the Hill District in Pittsburgh pre-urban renewal, right? Pre all the different devastation that's going to come from redlining and disinvestment. And, it's great. It's great. But you can go on the Carnegie Museum of Art archives, and they've digitized most of his photographs. So one of the people I mentioned before, Homer Hoyt, who was trained by Richard Ely, comes from Chicago. He's a realtor, and he gets into this whole world of appraisals and valuations, and he's going to become the head of the Federal Housing Administration. But before that, he writes this book called 100 Years of Land Values in Chicago. It's a great title, right? You want to buy it, you want to go out and get it. But I think what he writes is really instructive, right? Because he's trying to like refrain from making his judgments about it, but he's just buying into it also, right? Accepting as fact that this racial prejudice exists and is very real, and we as these valuators in this industry just have to accept this as reality and build everything around it, right? The ideas and the racial prejudice just becomes the default. So he says, part of the attitude reflected in lower land values is due entirely to racial prejudice, which may have no reasonable basis. It's like Pontius Pilate, I wash my hands. But we're still gonna give you him over, right? Nevertheless, if the entrance of a colored family into a white neighborhood causes a general exodus of the white people, Clybourne Park, such dislikes are reflected in property values. Except in the case of Negroes and Mexicans, however, these racial and national barriers disappear when the individuals in the foreign nationality groups, Jews, Italians, etc., rise in the economic scale or conform to American standards of living, assimilate into whiteness. While the ranking given below may be scientifically wrong from the standpoint of inherent racial characteristics, it registers an opinion or prejudice that is reflected in land values. It is the ranking of races and nationalities with respect to their beneficial effect on land values. And here you see the hierarchy, the sliding scale. Humanity, where do we draw the line of the color line? Shifts over time, right? You can also go back, if you want to go back in time, there's a whole other world of how the Irish became white in America too, 1840, the earlier time. It's not that different than the eugenicism, right? It's like, it's right there. Now they're not talking, we're not advocating, this may not all be right, it may not be scientifically true, but we're putting it in the textbook. Guess where else we're gonna put it? We're gonna put it in the FHA underwriting manual. So in order to qualify for a home loan, a 30-year fixed rate mortgage that is insured by the federal government, you go to your bank, but the bank is doing FHA lending, because these are the loans that the government guarantees to the bank that even if the home buyer goes into foreclosure, the federal government will reimburse 100% of the value of that mortgage to the lender, so the banks will not lose, even if the homeowner goes into foreclosure. But in order to get that money, the bank must conform to the FHA underwriting manual, which is also true for the developers of new properties. If you want to get FHA financing to build your new development, you also have to conform to this, and what does it say? The valuator should investigate areas surrounding the location to determine whether or not incompatible racial and social groups are present, to the end that an intelligent prediction may be made regarding the possibility or probability of the location being invaded by such groups. If a neighborhood is to retain stability, it is necessary that property shall continue to be occupied by the same social and racial classes. A change in social or racial occupancy generally leads to instability and a reduction in values, as was said from the seat before. Right? That kind of accepting as the default, like that this is the only way that things can ever be, that one white person will sell, then the next one will sell, and the next one will sell. Where does that come from? It doesn't necessarily come from here, right? This is already there, but then it just takes those ideas and writes them into stone almost. It codifies them in a way that also becomes national. So even if it's like one place is a little bit different and we're more accepting here or not, or there, right? This is federal policy, and the New Deal is far-reaching, right? These are amazing programs of social uplift. The Social Security Act, right, which also has its own racism in it, to the exclusion of domestic and agricultural workers, which if you're black in the South in the 1930s, you're pretty much working in one or the other, right? And you're excluded from Social Security Act. But in terms of the housing policy, it's not that different in terms of who is excluded. And now they're talking about how, in the absence of racial zoning ordinances, which are struck down by the Supreme Court in 1917, people come up with other ways to prevent what happens here. So there's deed restrictions. You can look in the old deeds to homes. It says who you're allowed to or not allowed to sell your home to, or restrictive covenants that might cover a larger area. And there are a lot of different cities who've done some really great research to uncover that history. I'll share a website with you in a little bit. But this is all into the FHA underwriting manual. Homer Hoyt, again, right? Same idea as the guy we just saw in the last slides, is the head of FHA and the documenter, the writer of much of this underwriting manual. It's a little bit mixed up, but I like the flow of it this way a little bit more. So the precursor to FHA is the Homeowners Loan Corporation. And how many of you have ever seen this map before? So I used to do these talks a long time ago, and most people have never seen, or have you seen a map similar to this for somewhere else of redlining? So these are maps, the maps that were created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation. I don't like to give them too much power in the sense that they were not necessarily as predictive, right? Like all the specific boundaries, but they're indicative of a way of thinking and the valuation that happens at this point in time. And they're really great because they're visual, they're colorful, and you can like plug yourself into like, where am I on this map? So the group that I do, I've done some work with, we have an exhibit called Undesign the Red Line, and we bring these maps out and let people pin themselves up on the map so you can see. Now the color scheme, you saw on the very first slide, there's like this kind of the color coding. When it says the highest rated neighborhoods are colored green, first grade, second grade is blue, third is yellow, sometimes called declining neighborhoods, and fourth grade, red, sometimes called hazardous. And they make these maps for about 239 cities and counties all around the country. And they're meant to be, they're not publicly available, but they do them as a way basically to show banks that you should be doing this in terms of your lending. Something similar, do your own assessment, but they send out surveyors, they have very specific instructions to go out and look at the name of the map. They're called residential security maps. And you pay attention to some of the language, right? They used the word invaded before. The other word you're gonna see in here is infiltration. Because it's all about preserving values, right? Protecting an investment that the federal government is backing, right? It's a very early public-private neoliberal partnership, right? The federal government is backing and investing in a way that allows private companies the opportunity to grow and become bigger and bigger and bigger, like the banks have become over many years. So the federal government's backing is also now invested in this system, and they want to preserve the values just as much. And so they want to create these systems of security for investments. Now here's the thing, right? There's this tension, because what is a house? What is a house? And we could do a little audience participation here too before we get into questions. But I'll ask you, what is a house? Shelter. And what was it? 4 walls. 4 walls. And it's an investment, right? So basically it's a shelter, it's your home. Often it's your home, but it's also an investment. It's both, and there's this tension, right? In a capitalist system, and also a country that capitalism has very much been racialized since its inception here. And you'll see it right here in these maps. So behind every single one of these neighborhoods, there is an area description. I'm going to highlight a few of them, and I'll also show you the website if you want to go in. You can click on any of these and read the area description for any neighborhood. But here we have, of course, a map of Lower Westchester County. I think it's made in 1937. Okay. This is part of Yonkers, northeast part of Yonkers. It is green, graded A, A3, and here's the description. A highly restricted residential area of which occurred more recently. Now, the word restricted is really important because in order to get a green first grade rating, you must have restrictions. In fact, that's the difference between a green area and a blue area. How restrictive you are. Improvements comprise single-family homes of substantial size and attractive design. Plots are large and well-landscaped. Land is rolling and wooded. Favorable influences, character of occupants and improvements. Zoning restrictions and attractiveness of location. Detrimental influences, none. So you're gonna get an A grade. You do so well on this test, you get an A. Inhabitants, executives and professionals, making good money. Foreign born, 0, none. Negro, no, 0%. Infiltration of, none. Relief families. This is like during the Great Depression, if you're on relief, right? You're getting some kind of social support, none. And then you can see it says a little bit more. Clarifying remarks. This section is inconvenient to the center of Yonkers, which is in no way detrimental. Residents consider themselves as living in Bronxville, which adjoins to the west, use the Bronxville stores and station for commuting purposes as well as its post office and telephone exchange. In the extreme southeastern tip, there are a few large modern apartment houses which do not affect even the immediately adjoining properties. The less desirable and only sparsely settled section to the west is not an adverse influence as there is sufficient undeveloped territory between the two. Gotcha. I'm just gonna read a couple more highlights from here. Here's a blue rated neighborhood in Mount Vernon. Favorable influences, strong appeal to the modest income group. But there is a detrimental influence which keeps it from getting a green grade, which is to say that there's a possible influx of less desirable element from the Bronx. But still, no foreign born and no black residents. All right, so it's still an all-white neighborhood, but it does not have the same restrictions. And trend of desirability is stable unless there be a shifting of population from Bronx County. Yellow neighborhood, for example, in here in New Rochelle, pretty close to where we are right now. Favorable influences, proximity to center of the city. Detrimental influences, encroachment of business and infiltration of less desirable element. Inhabitants, shopkeepers and white collar. Foreign born, mixed, so immigrants from different places, 20% of the population. Negro, yes. No, this one says no, sorry. 0% still. But you have immigrant population here as well, right? But the trend of desirability is down. This is why it's considered a declining area. All right, and then right next to it, by comparison, also here in downtown New Rochelle, favorable influences that it is conveniently located. But here at the top, description of terrain, right? An old section of the city now given over to Negroes. Nearly all the dwellings have been converted into small units. And the inhabitants are laborers and domestics, foreign born, Italians, 10%. Negroes, yes, 90%. Infiltration of Negroes, relief families, a great many. Demand has never ceased and there is a waiting list for vacant units. High demand for apartments. Doesn't mean the rents are cheap, by the way. In fact, it means because of the restrictiveness, you'll actually pay more for lower quality housing if you're a black. Right, it is a particularly desirable spot for Negroes who desire to move from Harlem. I'll show you just here one more really quick. Here, D2, also in Yonkers. I just want to highlight here, right, that these neighborhoods to outside valuators don't look good, but remember what we were just looking in through the listener, right, in that community newspaper through different eyes. And here they're talking about, right, Italians live in the western section and the colored element lives from Wilson Ave eastward. This Negro section comprises mostly post office clerks or New York City employees, and many own their own homes. right? So these are like the same neighborhoods that are being celebrated, right? And this is a racially integrated neighborhood. Yet to outside valuators, right? So you have to like juxtapose this. Who has power, who doesn't necessarily have power, right? Because this is also about power. But through different eyes, it's a different experience. And this is an ad I found in the New York Times just about a development in Scarsdale using some real protection language and kind of crazy imagery. But I want to highlight, if you want to explore these maps more on your own, you can just type in your search engine mapping inequality, or you can go to dsl.richmond.edu. We have an exhibit that I worked on called Undesign the Redline. It's up at Barnard. If you want to see a lot of this stuff in person and interact with it, it'd be great to bring it somewhere up here. I've been trying to bring it to Fordham. We've done it all around the country because the story is very similar. I mean, it's specific to each city, but it plays out all around the country. Chicago, Clybourne Park, right? Contract selling, basically, we don't have time to go into all the details, but it sets up a system of wealth extraction, right? This is the other piece that's really important, is for black families, middle-class black families who do own their own homes, it's often on predatory terms. You pay more, there's different iterations of the predatory kind of lending crisis that we still have seen, right? That goes way back in time, and researchers estimate that just in the 1950s and 60s, that between $3 and $4 billion of wealth from black families was extracted through contract selling. To think about that. Where is that wealth being extracted from, and then where is it going to? From one family to another, from one neighborhood to another. How that gets reinvested. Where does that money go? Where does it flow? Follow the money. The other thing I'll just mention really briefly is that redline neighborhoods become more likely to be cited for slum clearance and urban renewal projects. It's where they build highways. It's where they build civic centers, post offices, any kind of stadium you see, most likely built on a neighborhood where people of color lived. And if you want to read a book kind of about the long-term effects of this, written by a psychiatrist, Mindy Thompson-Fullilove, it's called Root Shock. This is one of my students drew this. I thought it was a great visual for kind of understanding how urban renewal really messed with a lot of what she calls the archipelago of Black America. And then in the 1970s, we have this kind of war on drugs, but extending to many different ways where budget cuts are justified, kind of austerity politics based on blaming people who live in neighborhoods that have now been redlined for a long time for all the problems that exist there. I always have issues because we just named the new Penn Station after Senator Moynihan, who was also the architect of the benign neglect memos, and would say things like people in the South Bronx don't want housing or they wouldn't burn it down, blaming all the fires on the residents. And there's just lots, of course, to acknowledge about this history, and we don't have time to go into it now, but I want to say, in conclusion, that there is also a really long history of the ways that people have been organizing against this and creating alternative models. In Weeksville in Brooklyn, going back to the 1820s, you had a longshoreman, James Weeks, purchase a tract of land from the Lefferts farm and subdivide it and allow all the members of the black community to purchase property so that they could all vote, because you had to own property to vote in New York State in the 1820s. And they have the Weeksville Heritage Center in Brooklyn you can go visit. In the 1960s, the very first community land trust is started as part of the civil rights movement. And the Contract Buyers League, these are some folks at Banana Kelly, people organizing against the different tactics that happen. And I just want to highlight also someone that I got to do a little bit of work with, Gail Sincata, who lived in a neighborhood not far from Clybourne Park, where all that kind of block busting happened and the white families moved out. And she was one of the white families that said, actually, I'm not going to move out. I'm going to stay in, we're going to fight, and we're going to fight against redlining. She actually ended up helping to lead a national movement against redlining and passing what was called the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act in 1975 that requires banks to disclose which neighborhoods they're making loans in and where they're not. Basically to prove that redlining existed, because the banks all denied that they were doing it. So it's not, like what happens here is not the only option, and there's a lot of things we're doing now. We're working on passing the New York Public Banking Act that can invest in a lot of different models. I'm gonna leave it with my last little favorite new creation, which is the driver's co-op. Anyone know about the driver's co-op? So kind of disgruntled Uber and Lyft workers, right? Most of whom are black and brown folks, right? Getting taken advantage of in all the different ways, mostly getting high cost car loans and all the different things, extraction, decided they were gonna leave and start their own company, and it would be owned by the workers themselves. So you could download the driver's co-op app, put it on your phone. This is all a piece of what we call restorative economy and economic democracy, is to say, like, a little thing you can do instead of choosing Uber or Lyft for your cab, if that's what you use. Call the driver's co-op, use the app. It works exactly the same way. In this case, the drivers are the owners, and the money's not going to Wall Street, it's not going to Silicon Valley, right? The money's getting reinvested. And it's like the little pieces like this are the ways that we get to start to push back and fight back on the shoulders of many who've come before us. All right, thank you. That is probably a little too long. Okay. Want me to turn this off?
No.
Leave it on?
Gregory, Jost, thank you so much. So for those of you who have to scoot, please feel free. If you want to stay, we're going to open to questions in the audience. And that's a lot.
It was a lot.
I can't believe how much you know. It's really fascinating. And I have like this feeling in my body right now that's so overwhelmed. But if we have any questions, please raise your hand, because we have someone who will bring a microphone around. It's this microphone. I have the microphone, then I will bring it around. I do want to say that we have a housing crisis now in our county, in our state, in our country. And I have read the Cheryl J. Harris article, which I read with the New Roar group here in Rochelle about whiteness as property. And I think that what we're seeing a lot now with the housing crisis and people calling for affordable housing are a lot of white folks who get up and say, I pay taxes, I worked really hard, the neighborhood's going to go to pot if we have affordable housing. And so it's really not gone. And there's this same idea that if you own a home and you pay taxes, that you want to maintain your neighborhood, and we have the same sort of myths about that we've had now for hundreds of years. So I just wanted to be clear that we've gotten better, but we also really still are in the thick of this. And so education like this is really helpful, and I hope that we start learning it younger. Instead of bringing it to Fordham, let's bring it to high schools, yeah. Right? So anyway, does anyone have any questions before we close out today? If not, I have a couple of closing remarks. I just want to thank Gregory, Kevin, Free, again, the Westchester Board of Legislators for funding this, LMC for always being great partners, LMC Media. I want to thank my Cure family. Pam Brandman really keeps everything floating. Gabby Bumberg, and just thank you all so much for being here. We're going to send out an email with all the things that were said today. Can we have your PowerPoint? Maybe. Okay, we'll see. If not, we have.
Eventually, sure.
Eventually, okay. When you
Eventually.
fine tune it.
Yeah.
Okay. But we will have tons of resources and references sent out. So I thank you so much. Thank you to the Humble Bumble book outside and the actors and you.
Thank you and thank you.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Cure's next event is the Jam for Justice. It's a fundraiser, but it's free entry. There's no obligation to donate. We want to bring the community together around music. It's happening at the St. Thomas Church, the Episcopal Church in Mamaroneck. There'll be 7 local bands, Ray's Empanadas, the Humble Bumble book. Alvin and friends might bring some cocktails. There are 2 portions. There's a family fun time in the day. There's the grown-up groove at night. And again, free entry, no obligation to donate. Please come. That's April 29th. Thank you.